The first orphaned pup arrived before dawn. By sunset, 3 more had been left at her door. Then 7. Then 12. Within weeks, every orphaned wolf pup in the Alpha King's territory had disappeared, only to be found sleeping inside the tiny cabin of an Omega girl the kingdom had spent years pretending didn't exist. No one had seen her steal them. No one had seen her call them. Because she hadn't. The Alpha King's own wolves were bringing them. The same wolves that had torn apart armies, guarded royal borders, and obeyed no one except their king, walked for days with frightened newborns cradled gently between their jaws, only to lay them at the Omega's feet before lowering their heads in silent respect. The kingdom called it witchcraft. Hunters searched the forest. The nobles demanded her execution. And the Alpha King gave a single order: find the woman who stole my wolves. But when his soldiers finally reached the lonely cabin, they discovered something even more impossible. Every wolf in the clearing stood between the Omega and the king's men, not as beasts protecting prey, but as loyal guardians defending the one they had chosen instead of their alpha. And the moment the Alpha King looked into the young woman's eyes, he realized the wolves hadn't betrayed him. They had been trying to warn him. Winter had swallowed Blackthorn Hollow whole. The mountains stood like sleeping giants beneath endless blankets of snow, their jagged peaks disappearing into thick clouds that smothered the moon. Every breath carried the sharp sting of ice. Every gust of wind whispered through the Frostpine forest like the mournful voices of forgotten spirits. Most creatures hid from the storm. Most people locked their doors before darkness fell. But one small cabin remained awake. Golden firelight flickered softly through frost-covered windows, creating a tiny beacon of warmth surrounded by endless white. Inside, Lyra Ashmore carefully wrapped another blanket around a sleeping wolf pup no larger than her hands. Its tiny chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Its fur was still damp from melting snow. The little creature whimpered in its sleep. Lyra smiled despite the ache in her own body. "You aren't alone anymore," she whispered, her voice softer than the crackling fire. "Not while I'm still breathing." The pup settled instantly, as though recognizing the promise inside her words. Around the cabin, nearly 20 orphaned wolves slept peacefully. Some were missing parents taken by hunters. Others had survived avalanches. Several still carried scars from traps hidden deep within the mountains. Each had arrived the same impossible way. Delivered. Never abandoned. Always carried. Lyra never questioned why. She simply opened her door every time she heard scratching outside. The kingdom had rejected her years ago. She refused to reject anyone else. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, warmth still existed. It was enough. For now. Years earlier, people had once called Lyra cursed. She remembered every face, every whisper, every frightened stare. She had been barely 7 years old when the Blood Moon Massacre stole her parents. Their pack vanished overnight. Homes burned. Families disappeared. Only Lyra survived. The elders had searched desperately for answers. Instead, they found something far easier. Someone to blame. An Omega child whose wrist glowed silver whenever the moon became full. Bad luck. An omen. A curse. She still remembered the day they forced her beyond the village gates. No food. No supplies. Only silence. Not one person looked back. Not even the women who had once braided flowers into her hair. The loneliness never truly disappeared. She simply learned how to survive beside it. The forest became her family. The wolves, her companions. The storm intensified. Branches groaned beneath heavy snow. Then, a distant howl echoed through the darkness. Low, ancient, powerful enough to vibrate through the frozen ground. Every wolf pup inside the cabin instantly lifted its head. Not frightened, expectant. Lyra slowly stood. She already knew. Another one had come. She wrapped her old gray cloak around her shoulders before opening the wooden door. A wave of icy wind rushed inside. Snow danced through the air. Standing beneath the towering pine trees was the largest wolf Lyra had ever seen. Its black fur shimmered beneath pale moonlight. Silver eyes glowed with impossible intelligence. Scars covered its enormous body like trophies earned across countless battles. Everyone in Blackthorn Hollow knew stories about this beast. Fenrir, the Alpha King's legendary guardian. Entire armies had fled after seeing those silver eyes. Children were raised on tales of the monster that protected the royal bloodline. Yet, tonight, Fenrir approached without aggression, without warning, without fear. Between his jaws rested another newborn wolf pup. Its tiny body barely moved. Lyra's heart clenched. Oh! She immediately knelt. You poor little thing. Fenrir lowered his massive head with astonishing care. The pup slipped gently into Lyra's waiting arms. The tiny creature was freezing. Its heartbeat fluttered weakly beneath damp fur. Lyra wrapped it inside her cloak against her chest without hesitation. It's all right, she whispered. I've got you. Fenrir didn't move. Instead, the gigantic wolf simply watched her. There was something strangely human inside those silver eyes tonight. Almost hope. Lyra carefully brushed snow from the newborn's face. I don't know where you keep finding them, she said softly, looking back at Fenrir. But thank you. The legendary beast slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Not from exhaustion. Not from injury. Submission. Respect. Lyra frowned. No. She laughed quietly. You don't bow to someone like me. Fenrir remained exactly where he was. Snow settled across his black fur. His gaze never left hers. A strange warmth spread beneath the silver birthmark hidden beneath Lyra's sleeve. She rubbed her wrist absent-mindedly. The glow disappeared. She thought nothing of it. Fenrir noticed everything. After several silent moments, the great wolf stood once more. He released one final deep rumble, almost affectionate, then vanished back into the forest, leaving Lyra staring after him. What are you trying to tell me? Only silence answered. Miles away, Blackthorn Keep towered above the kingdom like a fortress carved directly from the mountain itself. Torches flickered along endless stone walls. Steel echoed through moonlit courtyards. Soldiers trained despite the blizzard. Inside the castle, warmth did not exist. Only discipline. King Kale Draven stood before towering windows overlooking the sleeping capital. His black cloak hung motionless behind him. His broad shoulders carried years of warfare. His expression revealed nothing. Below, commanders waited nervously. No one dared interrupt his thoughts. Finally, one captain stepped forward. My king. Kale never turned. What is it? The Northern Patrol returned. Silence. They've lost another. Kale's eyes narrowed. Another what? The Royal Wolves. The room grew colder. Captain Rowan swallowed hard. That's 7 this month. They disappear after midnight. No blood. No tracks. No signs of battle. They simply... He hesitated. They leave. Kale slowly faced them. His piercing silver eyes carried the weight of countless wars. Leave. Yes, Your Majesty. They ignore commands. They return before sunrise. And none of your soldiers thought to follow them? The captain lowered his head. We tried. They disappear into Frostpine Forest. Every time. Kale's jaw tightened. Royal wolves were not ordinary animals. They had been bonded to the throne for generations. They obeyed only one alpha. Him. If they were abandoning him, something impossible was happening. Something dangerous. Prepare my horse. My king. I'll follow them myself. No one argued. No one dared. Hours later, the forest stood silent beneath endless snowfall. Kale moved without sound through ancient pines, his black stallion waiting far behind. Ahead, moonlight revealed enormous paw prints. Fresh. Fenrir's. The Alpha King followed them deeper into territory even hunters feared entering. Minutes became nearly an hour. Then, warm light appeared between the trees. A cabin. Impossible. Kale stepped behind a frozen oak. His hand instinctively rested upon the sword at his side. Fenrir emerged from the darkness. Another royal wolf followed. Then another. Then another. Kale's heartbeat slowed. There were nearly a dozen. His elite guardians. Each carried orphaned pups. One by one, they approached the tiny cabin. The wooden door opened. A young woman stepped outside. She wore patched clothes beneath an old gray cloak. Loose chestnut hair framed a face touched by quiet exhaustion rather than fear. She wasn't beautiful in the polished way noble women tried to be. She was something rarer, gentle, alive. Without hesitation, she accepted every trembling pup. She thanked each wolf individually, touched each scarred muzzle with kindness, smiled at creatures that had torn armored warriors apart. And the impossible happened. Fenrir, the greatest wolf ever born beneath the Alpha throne, lowered his massive head beneath her hand. Not obedience. Trust. Kale forgot to breathe. He had commanded these wolves through battles, through blood, through death. Yet none of them had ever looked at him the way they looked at her. One frightened pup began crying. The young woman held it close. Instantly, every wolf surrounding her relaxed. The forest itself seemed calmer. Even the wind softened. Kale felt something unfamiliar tighten inside his chest. Not suspicion. Not anger. Something deeper. Something dangerous. Who was she? Why had destiny hidden her here? As if sensing another presence, the young woman slowly lifted her head. Her eyes met the darkness, where Kale stood hidden. For one endless heartbeat, neither moved. Then she instinctively pushed the pups behind her, protecting them. From him, Kale stepped from the shadows. Moonlight revealed the feared Alpha King in all his terrifying glory. His black cloak flowed behind him. Silver eyes burned like winter stars. His sword gleamed at his side. Every wolf immediately became alert. Yet none stood between Kale and the girl. Instead, they stood beside her. Kale's gaze dropped as she instinctively raised one trembling hand. The sleeve of her cloak slipped backward. Moonlight struck the inside of her wrist. A delicate silver mark began glowing beneath her skin. Kale froze. His pulse thundered through his veins. Impossible. That symbol had vanished from the world centuries ago. And, according to every forgotten prophecy, it belonged to only one woman, the future Moon Queen. The forest held its breath. Snow drifted silently between towering pines as though time itself had frozen beneath the pale moon. Neither the Alpha King nor the Omega Girl moved. Only the wolves shifted uneasily, their silver eyes flickering from Kale to Lyra and back again, sensing an invisible current neither human fully understood. Kale Draven stared at the glowing mark upon her wrist. Every lesson his father had forced upon him during childhood returned with brutal clarity. The moon mark, a blessing granted only once every several centuries. The symbol of the woman destined to restore the ancient bond between wolves and the crown. A legend, a myth, something scholars had declared extinct. Yet it glowed before him, living, breathing, hidden inside a lonely girl wearing patched clothing and worn leather boots. Lyra instinctively pulled her sleeve down. The glow disappeared beneath rough fabric. Her heartbeat refused to slow. The stranger standing before her radiated impossible authority. Even before recognizing the silver wolf crest embroidered across his dark cloak, she had already known. Power carried its own scent. Cold steel, winter smoke, ancient cedar, blood. This was not merely a king. This was the Alpha. Every instinct buried deep inside her Omega soul whispered the same warning. Run. Yet another voice, one far quieter, asked something entirely different. Why doesn't he frighten me? Kale finally spoke. His voice was calm, low, controlled. Those wolves. His silver eyes drifted toward the sleeping pups. They belong to the crown. Lyra gently tightened her arms around the smallest orphan. They don't belong to anyone. Her answer arrived before fear could silence it. They chose to come. For several long seconds, silence stretched between them. Most people trembled beneath Kale's gaze. Most avoided looking into his eyes altogether. This girl did neither. She remained cautious, respectful, but she refused to surrender her dignity. Strange, very strange. Fenrir quietly walked between them. The enormous wolf nudged Lyra's shoulder affectionately before turning toward Kale. A single deep rumble echoed from his chest. Not hostile, almost expectant. Kale understood Fenrir better than anyone alive. That sound carried only one meaning. Trust her.
His jaw tightened.
Fenrir had never asked him to trust anyone. Not once. Until tonight. The fire inside Lyra's cabin crackled softly. For the first time in years, another human sat inside those walls. Kale remained standing near the doorway, his broad shoulders nearly filling the small room. The cabin smelled of pine wood, lavender, fresh herbs, and warm bread cooling beside the hearth. Simple. Peaceful. Nothing inside belonged to someone practicing forbidden magic. Bundles of dried healing plants hung from wooden beams. Hand-sewn blankets covered every sleeping pup. Clay bowls filled with warm goat's milk rested beside tiny beds woven from straw. No luxury, only care. Kale slowly looked around. You care for all of them? Lyra nodded while feeding the weakest pup through a carved wooden spoon. There were only 3 last winter. She smiled sadly. This winter there are 27. Kale frowned. 27. They keep finding me. She looked toward the frosted window. I never ask where they come from. I only know they arrive frightened. So I stay awake. You live alone? I've always lived alone. Her answer carried no bitterness, only quiet acceptance. That unsettled Kale more than anger ever could. No resentment, no self-pity, only compassion. How could someone abandoned by every pack still choose kindness? He had spent years believing pain created monsters. Yet somehow, pain had created her. Outside, snow continued falling. Inside, one tiny wolf suddenly began coughing violently. Its fragile body shook uncontrollably. Lyra immediately rushed toward it. Oh no! She gently lifted the pup. Its breathing became shallow. Its tiny heartbeat fluttered wildly beneath her fingers. Kale stepped closer. The fever. Lyra nodded. It started yesterday. The herbs aren't helping. Another pup began coughing. Then another. Within moments, nearly half the cabin echoed with weak cries. Lyra's expression paled. No. Please.
Not all of you.
She moved desperately from one tiny body to another, replacing blankets, checking breathing, cooling burning foreheads. Nothing worked. Kale watched carefully. He had seen this sickness before, months ago. Inside the royal kennels, it had killed dozens of wolves despite every healer the kingdom possessed. No cure existed. The silence inside the cabin became unbearable. One tiny heartbeat
stopped.
Lyra froze. The lifeless pup lay motionless inside her trembling hands. Her lips parted. No sound escaped. She had buried too many. Far too many. Not again. Please. Tears blurred her vision. Without thinking, she pulled the tiny body against her heart. I'm here. Her whisper barely existed. You don't have to be afraid anymore. The words were meant for the pup, perhaps also for herself. Then, something impossible happened. A faint silver glow spread beneath her fingertips.
Warm, soft,
gentle. The cabin filled with quiet moonlight despite every curtain remaining closed. Kale's breath caught. The silver mark beneath Lyra's sleeve illuminated once more. Not bright, not violent, peaceful, like moonlight reflecting across still water. The light flowed into the tiny wolf. Its frozen chest suddenly rose. A weak breath escaped. Then another. The heartbeat returned. Around the room, every sick pup slowly stopped coughing. Their breathing steadied. The fever vanished as though winter itself had withdrawn from them. The cabin became completely silent. Only the fire crackled. Lyra stared at the pup now blinking sleepily inside her hands. What? She whispered. What just happened? She looked toward Kale. His face revealed something she never expected. Not fear. Not suspicion. Wonder.
Pure.
Unguarded. Wonder. Miles away, inside Blackthorn Keep, Lady Seraphine Valcrest stood before enormous stained-glass windows overlooking the capital. Elegant fingers rested lightly upon the cold stone. Moonlight painted silver across her crimson gown. A servant hurried inside. My lady. She never turned. Speak. The king hasn't returned. She smiled faintly. He followed them. Yes. And the royal wolves entered Frostpine Forest. They gathered around. The servant hesitated. A woman. Seraphine's smile disappeared. What woman? An Omega. Silence.
Deadly.
The servant suddenly regretted entering the room. They remained with her until dawn. And His Majesty? He stayed. Seraphine slowly closed her eyes. Years. She had waited years. Patiently. Carefully. Removing every political rival. Winning every noble house. Positioning herself beside the throne. She understood Kale. His loneliness. His discipline. His emotional distance. She believed eventually he would choose stability. Choose her. Now an unknown Omega appeared from nowhere. One night. One meeting. And the Alpha King remained until sunrise. Danger. Not military danger. Far worse. Emotional danger. Seraphine turned toward her chief spy. I want her name. Yes, my lady. I want her history. Yes. I want every person who has ever spoken to her. The spy bowed. And if nothing exists? Seraphine's emerald eyes became frighteningly calm. Then create something. Morning arrived beneath pale gray skies. The storm had finally ended. Golden sunlight reflected across untouched snow. Outside the cabin, Kale prepared his horse. Lyra stood several steps away, holding the smallest pup inside her cloak. Neither wished to break the strange silence. Finally,
Kale spoke.
the sickness. She looked up. It has reached the royal kennels. Her heart tightened. The wolves. They're dying. I know. His voice remained calm, yet exhaustion lingered beneath every word. My healers have failed. My priests have failed. My physicians have failed. He looked directly into her eyes. I want you to come to Blackthorn Keep. Lyra blinked. What? The wolves trust you. They listened to you. They survived. I need your help. She instinctively stepped backward. The court would never allow someone like me inside. I know. They hate Omegas. I know. They'll blame me if anything goes wrong. Kale slowly approached. Not threatening. Simply honest. I'll bear that burden. She searched his face. Every instinct warned her not to trust kings. Kings had abandoned people like her all her life. Yet this man, this feared alpha, wasn't ordering her. He was asking. For the first time in years, the Alpha King needed someone. And somehow, that someone was her. Fenrir walked quietly to Lyra's side. The great wolf gently nudged her hand toward Kale, almost encouraging. She laughed softly despite herself. So, you've already decided? Fenrir blinked once. Kale almost smiled. Almost. Lyra looked toward the sleeping pups inside the cabin. Then toward the king. Finally, she nodded. I'll come. Neither of them realized. Far away beneath Blackthorn Keep, an ancient chamber sealed for nearly 600 years had just begun to awaken. Deep beneath layers of forgotten stone, a wall covered in silver runes suddenly cracked. Dust drifted into the darkness. Ancient symbols slowly began glowing beneath centuries of silence. And etched across the center of the chamber, the same moon mark burning beneath Lyra's wrist illuminated for the first time since the last Moon Queen vanished. The journey to Blackthorn Keep lasted 3 days. 3 days of endless snow. 3 days of silence. 3 days in which the Alpha King never once rode ahead of Lyra. He remained beside her. Not because she required protection, but because, somewhere beneath years of discipline and scars, he found himself unwilling to let her disappear from his sight. The royal procession moved through ancient pine forests where frost glittered like shattered diamonds beneath weak winter sunlight. Fenrir walked ahead of them. The other wolves surrounded Lyra instead of their king. Whenever her horse slowed, they slowed. Whenever she stopped to help an exhausted pup resting inside the wagon behind her, the entire pack stopped with her. The soldiers noticed. No one dared speak. Yet whispers spread quietly from rider to rider. The wolves aren't guarding the king anymore. They're guarding her. Captain Rowan watched the strange procession with growing unease. He had served Kale for 15 years. He had seen those wolves charge through burning battlefields without hesitation. He had watched Fenrir drag wounded soldiers back to safety while arrows pierced his own flesh. But never had the royal pack abandoned formation simply because one young woman smiled at them. Something ancient stirred beneath this journey. Something older than kings. Lyra kept her eyes fixed on the snowy road ahead. She tried not to look toward Kale. Every time she did, his silver eyes were already watching her. Not with suspicion.
Not with desire.
With curiosity. As though she were a mystery he desperately wanted to understand. It unsettled her, because she found herself wondering exactly the same thing about him. He wasn't the monster the kingdom described. Yes, his presence filled every space with overwhelming authority. Even silence seemed to obey him. Yet every evening, when the soldiers made camp, she noticed things no one else appeared to see. Kale always fed Fenrir before eating himself. He quietly covered sleeping guards with spare blankets during freezing nights. He remembered every soldier's name. When one young scout injured his ankle climbing icy cliffs, Kale carried him nearly half a mile without complaint. No one praised him. No one even noticed. Except Lyra. Perhaps. Kings wore armor that wasn't made of steel. By sunset on the third day, Blackthorn Keep emerged from the mountain mist. It dominated the landscape like an ancient beast carved from black stone. Towering walls climbed toward the clouds. Hundreds of crimson banners snapped violently in the winter wind. Massive iron gates slowly opened. The deep groan echoed across the valley. Lyra's stomach tightened. The castle was beautiful.
It was also terrifying.
Everything felt enormous.
Cold. Perfect.
She instinctively glanced down at her worn boots, still dusted with dried snow. Her patched gray cloak suddenly felt embarrassingly small. Servants gathered in neat rows. Noble families lined the grand staircase. Royal guards struck their spears against stone. Boom, boom, boom. The sound rolled through the courtyard like thunder. Kale dismounted first. The entire castle lowered their heads. My king. Their voices echoed together. Then every gaze shifted toward Lyra. Silence. Absolute silence. She felt it immediately. Judgment.
Disgust.
Confusion. Some stared openly at the sleeping wolf pups nestled inside the wagon. Others looked only at the faded clothes covering the mysterious Omega walking beside their king. One noble woman whispered loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Is that really her? Another answered. She looks like a servant.
No.
An older lord scoffed. Servants are cleaner. Laughter spread softly through the crowd. Lyra lowered her eyes. Old memories returned instantly. The village. The exile. The whispers. Always the whispers. She tightened her grip around the smallest pup sleeping peacefully inside her arms. At least someone still needed her. Kale heard every word. His jaw hardened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten anyone. He simply looked across the courtyard. The laughter died immediately. No speech was necessary. The Alpha King's silence carried sharper edges than any blade. He stepped beside Lyra. Walk with me. It wasn't an order. It sounded strangely like reassurance. For reasons she couldn't explain, her heartbeat steadied. Hidden above the courtyard, Lady Seraphine watched everything from an arched balcony. Her emerald eyes never blinked. So, this was the girl. Smaller than expected. Younger. Far too ordinary. How disappointing. She had imagined someone breathtaking. Someone obviously dangerous. Instead, she found a timid Omega carrying wolf pups as though they were children.
Why?
Why would Kale look at someone like her? Seraphine observed something most people missed. Kale slowed his stride, without realizing it, matching Lyra's pace. The Alpha King had never adjusted his pace for anyone. Not generals. Not nobles. Not visiting monarchs. Not even her. Something inside Seraphine became very still. Very cold. This girl had already changed him. That made her dangerous. Hours later, darkness settled over the castle. A blizzard once again howled beyond the stone walls. Inside the royal wolf kennels, the The scent of sickness hung heavily in the air. Even before entering, Lyra felt it.
Pain.
Dozens of enormous wolves lay scattered across fresh straw. Some barely breathed. Others whimpered weakly in restless sleep. Several healers stood nearby.
Exhausted. Defeated.
Bowls of untouched medicine covered wooden tables. Nothing had worked. Kale quietly spoke. This began 6 weeks ago. It spreads faster every day. If it reaches the wild packs. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Lyra already understood. Entire bloodlines would disappear. She slowly knelt beside the nearest wolf. Its breathing rattled painfully. Its once brilliant silver eyes looked dull beneath fever. She placed one gentle hand against its neck. The enormous animal immediately relaxed. The healers exchanged confused glances. One elderly physician frowned. Impossible. He attacked everyone else. Lyra smiled sadly. He's frightened. Not angry. She closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. Silence filled the enormous kennel. Even the storm outside seemed distant now. Then, almost unconsciously, she began humming. The melody felt older than memory itself.
Soft.
Gentle, like moonlight drifting across still water. The wolves lifted their heads, one after another. Their breathing synchronized. The restless, whining stopped. The entire kennel fell peacefully quiet. Silver light slowly emerged beneath Lyra's fingertips. Not bright enough to blind, only enough to comfort. It flowed across thick gray fur like liquid moonlight. The sick wolves trembled. Then, their wounds began closing. Fever vanished. Weak breathing strengthened. One massive wolf slowly stood on shaking legs. Another followed. Then another. Within minutes, dozens of wolves that had been dying only moments earlier surrounded Lyra peacefully. Several gently rested their heads against her shoulders. Others licked her hands. One old battle wolf pressed its forehead against hers before releasing a low, grateful rumble. The healers stood speechless. One dropped his medicine bowl. It shattered across the stone floor. Kale couldn't move. He had witnessed miracles on battlefields. He had survived impossible wars. None compared to this. She wasn't controlling them. She wasn't commanding them. She was healing something far deeper than flesh. She was healing fear itself. And for the first time since his father's death, Kale felt hope. The miracle spread through the castle before sunrise. Servants whispered excitedly through hallways. Soldiers smiled openly for the first time in months. Kitchen workers secretly carried fresh bread to the kennel, hoping to catch another glimpse of the mysterious Omega whose voice soothed monsters. Even children of palace servants began sneaking into the kennels after chores. They sat quietly beside Lyra, while wolf pups climbed clumsily into their laps. Laughter slowly returned to Blackthorn Keep. The castle had almost forgotten what laughter sounded like. Kale noticed every change. The darkness hanging over his home had begun lifting. And, somehow, every ray of light seemed to follow one woman. Late that evening, Lyra stepped outside into the royal gardens. Snow-covered ancient statues. Moonlight shimmered across frozen fountains. The silence felt peaceful after the crowded castle. She inhaled deeply. For the first time in years, she didn't feel completely alone. Footsteps echoed softly behind her. She already knew who it was. "You should be resting," Kale said. She smiled without turning. "So should you." He stopped beside her. Neither spoke for several moments. The winter wind carried the scent of cedar and snow between them. Finally, Kale broke the silence. "Why do the wolves trust you?" Lyra looked toward the stars. "I don't know. I never asked them to. They simply stay." "And people?" Her smile faded. "They usually don't." Kale looked at her profile. Moonlight illuminated quiet sadness across her face. Before thinking, he reached out. His gloved hand gently brushed a single snowflake from her hair. The touch lasted barely a second. Yet both of them froze. Something invisible surged between them. Warm, ancient, powerful. Their eyes met. Neither could look away. Somewhere deep beneath Blackthorn Keep, Ancient silver runes suddenly flared to life. And hidden in the shadows above the royal gardens, Lady Seraphine watched the entire moment unfold. Her elegant fingers slowly tightened around the stone railing until her knuckles turned white. For the first time in years, she felt something stronger than ambition: jealousy. And by dawn, she had already begun planning the downfall of the girl the wolves refused to leave. The first crack did not appear in the kingdom's walls. It appeared in its trust. Blackthorn Keep still echoed with laughter born from healed wolves and hopeful hearts, but beneath polished marble floors, another force had begun quietly spreading through the castle. Not disease, suspicion. And suspicion traveled faster than fire. Lady Seraphine Valcrest never acted in anger. She acted in silence. That was why she had survived every political storm for nearly a decade. Long before sunrise, candles burned inside her private chambers as spies arrived one after another, kneeling before her polished ebony desk.
Maps.
Letters. Wax seals. Forged reports. Each piece was carefully arranged until they formed the illusion of truth. A young spy lowered his head. "My lady, we found nothing." Seraphine slowly looked up. Nothing. The Omega. She truly lived alone. No secret meetings. No hidden allies. No dark rituals. The room became painfully quiet. Seraphine smiled. A slow, beautiful, terrifying smile. "Then," she said softly, "we shall give her a history worthy of execution." No one dared answer. She rose gracefully and walked toward the fireplace, where crimson flames danced across polished stone. The kingdom doesn't need facts. It needs fear. She tossed another forged letter into the growing pile. And fear always obeys a convincing story. By the week's end, the whispers had become accusations. Servants stopped smiling when Lyra entered a room. Kitchen maids quietly gathered their children closer whenever she walked through the halls. Even some soldiers avoided meeting her eyes. She noticed. Of course she noticed. She simply pretended she hadn't. The royal kennels remained the only place where silence still felt kind. Lyra sat among dozens of recovering wolves, gently brushing the thick silver fur of an elderly battle wolf sleeping with his head across her lap. The old warrior released a deep, contented rumble. "You like pretending you're terrifying," she whispered with a smile. "But you're really just tired." The wolf nudged her hand. A quiet laugh escaped her lips. "You agree." Footsteps echoed behind her. She turned. Kale stood in the doorway. No guards. No advisors. Just the king. "You've become popular." She smiled sadly. "I think the wolves are. They always were." He stepped inside. "They're simply reminding everyone." She tilted her head. "Reminding them of what?" Kale looked around the kennel. Massive wolves slept peacefully together. Some curled around orphaned pups. Others rested beside Lyra like loyal guardians. "They remember what peace feels like." His voice carried unusual softness. "I had almost forgotten." The silence between them no longer felt awkward. It had become comfortable, almost dangerous. Kale sat beside her on the straw-covered floor. Something no king had done in generations. One tiny wolf pup immediately climbed into his lap. He stared at the tiny creature. The pup stared back. Lyra covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. "He likes you." "I don't think he does." The little pup sneezed directly onto Kale's black cloak. Lyra laughed. A genuine laugh, bright enough to chase winter from the room. Kale turned toward her. He had heard soldiers celebrate victories. He had heard musicians perform before kings. None compared to that sound. Her laughter reached places inside him war had never touched. Without realizing it, he smiled. A real smile.
Small.
Barely noticeable, yet unmistakably real. Hidden beyond the kennel entrance, Lady Seraphine witnessed everything. Her nails slowly dug into her palms. Kale had never smiled for her. Not once. That evening, the royal council assembled inside the Hall of Crowns. Ancient banners hung between towering stone pillars. Noble families filled every seat. Military commanders stood against the walls. The atmosphere felt heavy. Lord Cedric rose first. My king. Kale remained seated upon the black throne.
Speak.
The nobles grow concerned. About the Omega. Several voices immediately joined. She's changing the wolves. She has enchanted the servants. Children refuse to leave the kennels. Our people speak her name more than yours. Silence followed. Every eye watched Kale. He answered without emotion. The wolves are alive. No one replied. The sickness is gone. Still silence. Our people have hope. Lord Cedric hesitated. Hope can become rebellion. Kale's silver eyes narrowed. Against whom? No answer came. Because everyone already understood. Against a king who allowed an Omega to stand beside him. Seraphine finally rose. Graceful.
Calm.
My king. She bowed elegantly. No one doubts her kindness. But kindness alone does not explain miracles. The council listened carefully. We know nothing of her bloodline. Nothing of her family. Nothing of where such power truly comes from.
Seeds.
That was all she needed. Tiny seeds. Given enough time. Fear would water them. Days passed. The castle slowly divided itself. One side believed Lyra had been sent by the Moon Mother herself. The other believed she had bewitched the wolves. Both stories spread equally fast. Lyra remained unaware of how deeply politics had begun poisoning every hallway. She continued healing, continued feeding orphaned pups, continued smiling at servants who no longer smiled back. She blamed herself. Perhaps she simply didn't belong here. One afternoon, Kale found her sitting alone inside the palace library. Ancient books surrounded her. She wasn't reading. She was staring silently through a stained-glass window as snow drifted beyond the castle walls. You've been avoiding everyone. She didn't deny it. I think they're happier when I do. Kale sat opposite her. They're afraid. Of me?
No.
He looked directly into her eyes. They're afraid of change. She lowered her gaze. I've spent my whole life making people uncomfortable. You make them question what they've always believed. That's different. She smiled weakly. It feels the same. Kale wanted to tell her she belonged, that the castle felt brighter because she walked its halls, that he found himself searching for her every morning without understanding why. Instead, duty silenced honesty. You've done nothing wrong. Her eyes softened. Thank you. Neither noticed someone quietly closing the library door outside. Listening. Waiting. That night, Seraphine's final move began. Under complete darkness, several masked mercenaries entered the royal wolf nursery. Sleeping pups never saw them coming. One by one, the tiny wolves disappeared. No blood. No cries. Only empty beds remained behind. Hours later, the stolen pups were hidden inside an abandoned hunting lodge deep within Frostpine Forest. Seraphine personally carried a bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside rested one of Lyra's spare cloaks. She smiled. Leave this. One mercenary frowned. My lady, the king trusts her. Not after tomorrow. The cloak was placed beside the frightened pups. Fresh footprints carefully surrounded it. Every trail pointed toward only one person. Lyra Ashmore. Dawn never arrived peacefully. The first scream echoed through the castle before sunrise. Then another. Then another. Royal guards rushed toward the kennels. Handlers searched every corridor. Soldiers flooded the courtyards. Captain Rowan kicked open the nursery doors. His face drained of color. They're gone. Every orphaned pup.
Gone.
Moments later, hunters discovered tracks leading north. Toward the forest. Toward an abandoned cabin. Toward Lyra's old home. And lying beside the trail, her gray cloak. Captain Rowan stared in disbelief. It can't be. But duty demanded action. Within minutes, the castle bells rang. Not once. Not twice. 7 times. The ancient signal for treason against the crown. Lyra awoke to pounding footsteps racing through the corridors. The door to her chamber exploded inward. Royal guards stormed inside with swords drawn. Captain Rowan entered last. Pain filled his eyes. My lady. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I'm sorry. Behind him, nearly 30 armed soldiers surrounded the doorway. The Alpha King orders your immediate arrest. Lyra's heart stopped. Outside, every wolf in Blackthorn Keep suddenly lifted its head toward the morning sky. Then, together, they began to howl. The sound shook the entire kingdom. The wolves did not stop howling. Their voices rolled across Blackthorn Hollow like a funeral hymn carried by the winter wind. From the castle towers to the poorest villages beyond the frozen river, every man, woman, and child lifted their head toward the sky. No one remembered the royal wolves ever crying together. Not even during war. Not even when kings had died. Something far worse was happening. The wolves were mourning. Lyra stood motionless in the center of her chamber. Captain Rowan lowered his sword. His expression was filled with guilt. My lady, I wish this were a mistake. 2 guards carefully stepped forward and placed enchanted silver shackles around her wrists. The cold metal bit into her skin. The moment the shackles touched the silver moon mark, the light beneath her skin disappeared. Lyra gasped softly. Something inside her felt empty, as though a part of her soul had suddenly gone silent. Fenrir burst into the hallway. The enormous wolf roared with terrifying fury. 4 guards were thrown backward before they even understood what had happened. He placed himself directly between Lyra and the soldiers. His silver eyes burned with rage. The entire hallway froze. Captain Rowan slowly lowered his gaze. Fenrir. The wolf answered with another growl that shook the stone walls. No one dared move. Then, heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor.
Kale arrived.
His black cloak swept behind him as silence immediately swallowed the castle. Fenrir looked toward his alpha. Kale looked back. For one long moment, neither moved. Finally, Kale spoke. Stand down. Fenrir refused. The wolf remained in front of Lyra, protecting her, not the king. Her. Kale felt something inside his chest tighten painfully. Even his oldest companion believed Lyra was innocent. Yet the evidence, the missing pups, the abandoned cabin, the cloak, every trail pointed toward her. His voice became quieter.
Please.
Fenrir slowly stepped aside. Not because he agreed, because Kale had asked. The great hall had never held so many people. Nobles filled every balcony. Soldiers lined every wall. Servants stood shoulder to shoulder near the entrance despite knowing they were forbidden to attend. No one wanted to miss the trial of the mysterious Omega. At the center of the hall, Lyra stood alone. Her wrists remained bound. Her patched gray dress looked painfully small beneath the enormous vaulted ceiling. Above her, the iron throne waited. Kale sat upon it without expression. Only his eyes betrayed him. They had never looked so tired. Lady Seraphine stood elegantly beside the throne, dressed in deep crimson. She wore sorrow perfectly. My king, she said softly. The evidence may now be presented. Captain Rowan stepped forward carrying a wooden chest. Inside rested Lyra's cloak, covered in snow. Lord Cedric addressed the court. The missing wolf pups were traced directly to the accused former cabin. He lifted the cloak. This was found beside the tracks. Murmurs swept through the hall. Another guard presented a leather satchel. Inside, tiny silver collars belonging to the missing pups. Lyra's heart nearly stopped. I've never seen those. Her voice trembled. They aren't mine. Lord Cedric continued. Hunters discovered footprints matching the accused. No. Lyra whispered. I never left the castle. The tracks say otherwise. They're lying. No one listened. Seraphine stepped forward with perfectly measured sadness. I truly wished these accusations were false. She lowered her head. You saved our wolves. You gave hope to this kingdom. But perhaps... She paused. That hope was only meant to gain our trust. The hall erupted into whispers. Exactly as she intended. Kale watched Lyra carefully. Not her words. Her eyes. He had spent years judging men across battlefields. Liars always revealed themselves.
Fear. Greed.
Calculation. Lyra showed only one emotion. Confusion.
Raw.
Heartbreaking confusion. She truly did not understand what was happening. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. Yet every piece of evidence rested before him. Duty chained him more tightly than any prison ever could. The doors suddenly burst open. Fenrir charged into the courtroom. The giant wolf ignored every guard, ignored every drawn sword. He crossed the hall and stopped beside Lyra. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he gently rested his massive head against her shoulder. The entire courtroom fell silent. One elderly noble whispered, "The Alpha's guardian has chosen her." Another answered, "Impossible." Fenrir released a low protective growl whenever anyone approached Lyra, even while standing only a few feet away from Kale. It had never happened before. Not once in the kingdom's history. Seraphine's heart pounded. This was dangerous. Very dangerous. She stepped forward. "My king, the beast has clearly been enchanted." Fenrir instantly snapped toward her. His teeth flashed. One more step, and he would have attacked.
Kale stood.
Enough! His command echoed through the chamber. Fenrir immediately lowered his head. The great wolf obeyed. But he never left Lyra's side. The final witness entered. A hunter from Frostpine Forest. Seraphine had paid him enough gold to buy 3 lifetimes. He knelt dramatically. "I saw her." Lyra stared. "No. You've never met me." "I watched her carrying wolf pups toward the old hunting lodge." The lie landed like a blade. More witnesses followed. Each story carefully rehearsed. Each accusation perfectly timed. Every false testimony strengthened the illusion. Lyra's voice grew quieter with every denial. "No, that isn't true. I never." No one believed her. Hours passed. The trial became less about truth and more about fear. Some nobles demanded execution. Others called for imprisonment. A few begged Kale to banish her before civil unrest consumed the kingdom. The Alpha King remained silent. His silence hurt Lyra more than every accusation combined. She searched his face, searching desperately for belief, for trust, for the man who had promised, "I'll bear that burden." Instead, she found only conflict. He wanted to defend her. She could see it, but he was also king. And kings carried kingdoms before hearts. A tear finally escaped down her cheek. Not because she feared death, because she finally understood. Even he could not choose her. Deep beneath the castle, the ancient moon chamber awakened again. Silver runes pulsed violently. Cracks spread across forgotten walls. An unseen voice echoed through the darkness. "The bond is breaking. The queen suffers. The kingdom shall suffer with her." No one above heard it, but every wolf did. They began howling again, louder than before. Kale slowly rose from the throne. The room became completely still. Every eye fixed upon their king. His voice sounded older than it had that morning. "Lyra Ashmore." She looked up. "I have searched for another explanation. There is none before this court." His hands clenched against the throne. His heart begged him to stop speaking. Duty forced every word forward. "Until the truth can be proven, you are stripped of the king's protection." The words struck her harder than any weapon. He continued, "You are sentenced." Silence filled the hall. To permanent exile beyond the Frostpine Mountains. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Execution would have been kinder. No one survived the frozen wilderness for long. Kale looked directly into her eyes. For one brief second, his carefully controlled expression shattered.
Pain.
Regret. Helplessness. She saw all of it. Yet he still spoke the final words. "You must leave before sunset." Lyra closed her eyes. Her heart did not break with noise. It broke quietly, like thin ice beneath fresh snow. When she finally opened them, the tears were gone. So was the frightened Omega who had entered this castle weeks ago. Something inside her had changed. She slowly removed the small woven bracelet she had made while caring for the wolf pups. Without speaking, she walked toward the throne. The guards reached for their swords. Kale lifted one hand. They stopped. Lyra placed the bracelet gently upon the lowest step beneath his throne. A gift. A farewell. When she finally spoke,
her voice was calm.
I forgive you. Kale's breath caught. But forgiveness. She looked into his silver eyes one last time. Doesn't mean you didn't break my heart. She turned and walked away. Behind her, Fenrir let out a howl so full of sorrow that every wolf in Blackthorn Hollow answered at once. Outside the castle, the winter sky darkened in the middle of the afternoon, and far beyond the northern mountains, something ancient opened its eyes. The gates of Blackthorn Keep closed behind Lyra with a sound that echoed through her soul. Not loud, not violent, final. The iron doors sealed shut beneath layers of ancient stone, separating her from everything she had dared to hope for. The castle disappeared behind drifting snow. She never looked back, because if she did, she feared she would never find the strength to keep walking. The wolves refused to let her leave alone. Fenrir stood waiting beyond the gates. Behind him, dozens more emerged from the forest. Gray wolves, white wolves, black wolves marked by countless battles. Even the smallest pups she had nursed stumbled through deep snow, determined to follow. Lyra stopped. No. Her voice trembled. You belong with your king. Fenrir walked closer. He gently nudged her hand. His silver eyes held only one answer. You are our home. Tears finally escaped. One by one, she embraced the wolves that had become her family. I can't ask you to abandon him. Fenrir looked toward the distant castle, then back toward Lyra. He released one quiet howl. Within seconds, nearly half of the royal wolves turned away from Blackthorn Keep and followed her. High above the northern cliffs, Kale watched from the western tower. Snow whipped against his black cloak. Captain Rowan approached carefully. My king. Kale never looked away. How many? The royal pack. Rowan hesitated. Half of them have left. Silence. They chose her. Another long silence. No anger crossed Kale's face. Only heartbreak. They didn't abandon me. His voice barely rose above the wind. They followed the one who deserved their loyalty. Rowan looked at his king. For the first time, the Alpha didn't resemble the conqueror who had terrified neighboring kingdoms. He looked like a man who had watched his own heart disappear into the snow. Inside the castle, celebration never came. Seraphine had expected relief.
Victory.
Instead, the halls felt empty. The servants moved silently. The wolves remaining inside the kennels refused to eat. Children cried because Lyra was gone. Even flowers decorating the palace began wilting. Something invisible had left with the Omega, and everyone felt its absence. Except they didn't understand why. That night, the sickness returned. Not to one wolf. To every wolf remaining inside Blackthorn Keep. Handlers rushed through the kennels. Healers worked until dawn. Nothing helped. The same illness Lyra had healed only days before spread twice as fast. Captain Rowan burst into the throne room. My king. Kale immediately stood. What happened? The wolves. They're dying again. Kale ran. The king, who had never hurried for anyone, now raced through stone corridors. He reached the royal kennels. The sight stole every breath from his lungs. Dozens of wolves lay trembling across the floor. Fenrir's oldest companions whimpered weakly. The youngest pups barely moved. One elderly wolf looked toward Kale. Its silver eyes searched desperately behind him. Searching for her. Kale slowly knelt beside the dying animal. I'm sorry. His voice cracked. The wolf gently rested its head against his knee, then closed its eyes. Kale lowered his head. His fists tightened. Nothing he had built, nothing he had conquered, nothing he had sacrificed, could save the creatures that had trusted him their entire lives. Because the one person who could heal them, he had driven away. Meanwhile, beyond the Frostpine mountains, winter became something different.
Wild.
Untouched. Ancient. Lyra walked through forests no human had entered for centuries. Towering trees shimmered beneath moonlight. Silver mist drifted silently across frozen rivers. Every night, more wolves joined her journey. Entire packs emerged from hidden valleys. They bowed their heads as she passed. Not from fear, recognition. Even Lyra began noticing strange things. Flowers bloomed beneath snow wherever she rested. Frozen streams thawed after she touched them. Birds returned to forests that had been silent for generations. The world itself seemed to awaken around her. Yet inside, her heart still ached. Every quiet moment reminded her of Kale, the way he had looked at her beneath moonlit gardens, the rare smile she had pulled from a man forgotten by happiness, the promise hidden inside his silver eyes, and the sentence he had spoken before the entire kingdom: exile. She closed her eyes. I forgive him. Her whisper disappeared into the wind. But why does it still hurt? Fenrir quietly rested beside her. The old wolf understood.